A hard question to answer is how all these little molecular events play into a personality.
There's a part of the brain called the hypothalamus. And the hypothalamus is like a little mini factory, and it is a place that assembles certain chemicals that matches certain emotions that we experience. Those particular chemicals are called peptides. They're small chain amino acid sequences. The body's basically a carbon unit that makes about 20 different amino acids all together to formulate its physical structure.
The hypothalamus is actually a structure that's a little bit more right below the thalamus, usually right in this area here. It's a little bit, you can see it as a little bit of a yellow area, and a little later on we'll show how it turns on during these experiences. But the hypothalamus is a main controller of body functions. It regulates all of our basic body functions: heart rate, blood pressure. It helps to regulate most of our hormones, including our sex hormones, stress hormones, and so forth. It helps to regulate our immune function, and it is the key regulator of the autonomic nervous system.
In the hypothalamus, we take small chain proteins called peptides, and we assemble them into certain neuropeptides or neurohormones that match the emotional states that we experience on a daily basis. So there's chemicals for anger, and there's chemicals for sadness, and there's chemicals for victimization. There's chemicals for lust. There's a chemical that matches every emotional state that we experience. And the moment that we experience that emotional state in our body or in our brain, that hypothalamus will immediately assemble the peptide that then releases it through the pituitary into the bloodstream. The moment it makes it into the bloodstream, it finds its way to different centers or different parts of the body. Now, every single cell in the body has these receptors on the outside.
And one cell can have thousands of receptors studding its surface, kind of opening up to the outside world. And when a peptide docks on a cell, it literally, like a key going into a lock, sits on the receptor surface and attaches to it and kind of moves the receptor, and kind of like a doorbell buzzing, sends a signal into the cell.
It's party time!
We've gone from emotions being these spiritual, immaterial things to things, they're not even things, to actual molecules with molecular weights and peptides with sequences and structures.
Science knows now that the hypothalamus makes neuropeptides, and those neuropeptides are strong chemicals.
It was in the early 70s that Saul Snyder and myself first identified opiate receptors in the brain and developed a method for measuring them. And then, people said, hey, what are they doing there? Why would we have receptors? Why would God put receptors in our brain? What would be the point of all this? And then people started to say, well, there must be an endogenous ligand. Ligand's an interesting word. It comes from the same root word as religion, ligare, that which binds. And people started to look, and before long they found a peptide which is called endorphin or enkephalin. And there's a lot of science around it and a lot of interesting information upon what systems in your body it regulates. So that's where it came from. And then following that, the Valium receptor was big. People found it and looked for endogenous Valium. And now marijuana receptors and endogenous marijuana is hot. There's enough data now to suggest that no psychoactive drug works unless it's binding to a receptor that's normally meant for an internal juice.
You mean I could make LSD if I wanted to?
Yeah, well, you do, but, it won't be chemically identical In fact, Time magazine had a mistake there. They said that morphine was chemically related to endorphins. And that's not true, because morphine is a different kind of chemical structure. Endorphins are a peptide, but they both fit into the same receptor. So LSD and all the psychoactive mushrooms and different analogs, they hit a variety of receptors, actually. And so it's not their chemical structure, it's having the right shape and electrostatic charge to fit into the receptor. Well, here's the story of the peptide in the cell. The peptides find the receptors and dock onto them and stay attached, and they come off, and then they can come back on again, and while they're there, they are changing the cell. A receptor that has a peptide sitting in it sets off a whole cascade of biochemical events, some of which changes the nucleus of the cell.